My uncle had always been a recluse, so it didn't surprise anyone in my family when he moved to a remote cabin in Alaska. I only heard from him on special occasions, a birthday card, a Christmas card, that was it. So it shocked me when I found out he'd passed away and left the cabin to me. A few weeks later, I flew out there to check the cabin out and see what I'd just inherited. I rented a truck and drove out there. As the houses disappeared and only a dense span of trees remained, I realized just how far off the grid my uncle's cabin was. He was over an hour away from the nearest town, house, or any sign of life. The drive was a challenging one. A snowstorm was picking up, and by the time I reached the winding, snow-covered driveway, it took all my focus not to skid into the trees. I parked the truck, checked the mailbox, and found an envelope in there addressed to me. It was from my uncle's lawyer and contained the keys to the cabin and surrounding buildings. I rushed into the cabin, and the cold hit me. I swear it was colder in there than it was outside. The lamp in the corner was flicking on and off, and there was this monotonous buzzing sound. I discovered the sound was coming from the generator. I recalled the lawyer telling me it had been turned off, but I figured there must have been a mistake that resulted in it being left on. I looked around the cabin. It was small, but included everything my uncle had needed. Old furniture, blankets, and a shelf of wood-carved animals. I knew my uncle carved them and sold them at the weekly market in town. The more I stared at those carvings, the more I found something disturbing about the way their faces were carved. I thought the solitude was getting to me, so I distracted myself by lighting a fire and bringing my luggage in from the truck. I unpacked the groceries I'd picked up on the way and went to put the milk and meat in the fridge when I was hit with this rotten smell. On the top shelf was a dead rat. It must have been in there a while, as it was starting to shrivel and decay. I slammed the door shut. I didn't understand how a dead rat had gotten into the fridge. Then, before I could think any more about this, the lights went out and the buzzing stopped. I knew it was the generator. As it was in my uncle's workshop, I knew I had to brave the storm to go and turn it back on. It was beginning to get dark outside, so I took a flashlight and trudged towards the workshop. As I fumbled with gloved fingers to open the lock, I stepped inside and saw shelves and shelves of those creepy-faced animal carvings. I hurried past them and went over to the generator and managed to figure out how to turn it back on. When I went back to the cabin and locked myself in for the night, I went and changed into some warm, dry clothes. When I returned, I saw something on the rug in front of the fire. It was one of my uncle's creepy carvings, an owl. I hadn't put it there, and no way I wouldn't have noticed it there before. This totally freaked me out, and I double-checked that the cabin door was locked. I heard this creaking upstairs, and suddenly, I had this horrible realization that I could have locked this intruder in there with me. I grabbed the biggest animal carving I could find and clutched it as a weapon as I walked up the stairs. The upstairs level only had 2 rooms in it, my uncle's room that I'd dropped my stuff in, and a spare room I hadn't been in yet. I could feel my heart pounding as I pushed the spare room door open and flicked on the light switch, and gasped in fear on seeing that I wasn't alone. A man with long, straggly hair and ripped clothes was humming to himself as he moved something along the windowsill. On hearing me, he spun around and bared his crooked teeth at me. He gave me this intense look and knocked something on the windowsill over. It was more of those creepy-faced animal carvings. He grabbed some in his arms, opened the window, and as a burst of snow swept into the room, he gave me one last look before he leapt out the window. I ran over there and peered out, and saw him running off through the snowstorm, those carvings gripped in his arms. I shut the window, barricaded the door, and just had to sit there and wait it out. The storm was too bad to drive anywhere. It took a couple of days for the storm to subside. I couldn't wait to leave that cabin, but as I was opening the front door, I saw something sticking out of the snow. That same creepy owl carving. I left the cabin and I haven't been back since. I never reported it. I know this sounds bad, but who's going to want to buy it if they think some crazy guy might break in and do weird stuff? I don't know who he was or what his fascination was with my uncle's creepy carvings. I doubt I'll ever know. But I do know one thing. I won't ever be going back to that cabin in the woods. I'd been with my boyfriend Alex for a couple of months, and as we both had roommates, finding time for just the two of us was proving challenging. So when he suggested we spend the weekend at his family's New Hampshire summer house, I immediately agreed. Being the winter season meant the roads were quiet, and as we drove past the frosty surroundings, I noticed how house after house was dark and empty, as most of the locals had gone south for the winter. It seemed that no one was home except for us. At the time, this added to the excitement. A romantic weekend with no disturbances sounded amazing. We unloaded the car and went inside the house. It was freezing in there, but my boyfriend left me to go turn the heat on. I looked around the house, impressed by the sheer size of it. As I walked into the kitchen, I noticed that it overlooked the beach. I was wrapping my arms around me for warmth as I peered through the window when I saw this woman standing there on the pathway leading from the beach to the backyard. She was wearing this long lace red dress, and she didn't have a jacket on, even though it was below freezing out there. She stared at me with this expressionless look. I turned when I heard my boyfriend return and told him about the woman, only when I looked back, she was gone. He said it was probably one of the locals checking that this house wasn't being broken into. I don't know. Something about that woman's demeanor seemed off, but I tried to push her from my mind and make the most of my alone time with my boyfriend. During the middle of our first night there, I went downstairs to get a glass of water and peered out of the window, only to see her standing there, that woman in the lace red dress. She was standing directly outside the window, just peering inside with the same expressionless look. Seeing her made me jump back in fright, and I dropped my glass. I just stood there, not knowing what to do. Then the woman stretched a long, pale arm out and tapped at the window with her long, bony fingers, 2 taps at a time. I felt myself begin to panic, so I ran backward out of there and rushed upstairs to get my boyfriend. I was frantic as I told him what had happened. He touched my shoulder and made me sit on the bed. Then he looked at my foot. I must have stepped in the broken glass as I ran away, and now my foot was bleeding. He passed me a Kleenex and told me to stay there while he went downstairs to check on the woman. I went into the bathroom and searched the cabinet for a Band-Aid. When I returned, I expected my boyfriend to be back, but when I noticed he wasn't, I got this uneasy feeling. I called his name as I walked downstairs, but he didn't reply. Then I heard this scream, this high-pitched woman's scream. There was something about it. It just didn't sound right. I moved as quickly as I could into the kitchen and stopped dead in my tracks. The back door was swinging open, allowing a strong gust of snowflakes to blow inside. In a shaky voice, I called my boyfriend's name as I tiptoed over to the door and peered outside. I saw fresh footprints in the snow, and again, I shouted for my boyfriend, "Alex!" Then I saw her standing by the pathway that led to the beach. It was the woman in the lace red dress. She looked at me with that same expressionless glare. Then she raised her hand and wiggled her bony index finger at me. Then she bent down and lifted something off the ground. Past the fence and bushes, I couldn't make out what it was, but I could tell from her shoulder movements as she walked away that whatever it was, she was swinging it back and forth. I screamed for Alex again and ran out into the snow, convinced that she'd done something to him. Then I heard my name being called, and I turned and saw Alex standing in the doorway looking at me in confusion. He told me he'd come downstairs and checked, but no one had been there, so he'd gone to get something from his truck. Then when he came back inside, he couldn't find me, and that's when he checked the kitchen and saw me outside. I refused to stay in that house for another night, so we left early the next morning. I'm the only one who saw the woman in the lace red dress, The relationship with my boyfriend fizzled out soon after that, but the nightmare from that night always stayed with me. I often find myself thinking back to that winter and wondering what it was that the woman in the red lace wanted from me. It was my final year of high school in 2013. The town I grew up in had a tradition among the high school students. It took place during the middle of winter and was known by everyone as the Frost. The rules were simple. Anyone who wanted to participate showed up in the clearing in the woods at sunrise, put $20 into the pot, and waited for whatever kid was organizing it that year to blow the whistle. Hidden around the forest clearing were hundreds of different colored origami snowflakes. The goal was to find 10 snowflakes first, but they all had to be of the same color. The catch was, once a player found a snowflake, they had to sacrifice an item of clothing and leave it there. 10 snowflakes, 10 pieces of clothing left behind. The first player back at the clearing with all 10 snowflakes and 10 items of clothing lighter won the pot. There was a one jacket rule, along with other protocols on sweaters, t-shirts, vests, etc. It was minus 10 degrees outside and had snowed the previous night, so needless to say it was unbearably cold. Surprisingly, about 20 participants still showed up, including me. I guess the draw of $400 outweighed a short burst of nakedness and cold. The contest started off okay. I had found 3 neon blue snowflakes and had taken off my coat, hoodie, and sweater. The chill was getting real now that I was down to my t-shirt, and I could feel the cold gnawing at my skin. I saw other people rush past holding colored snowflakes in different states of undress. They were letting out shivered laughs, and I found myself doing the same. Then I heard a different scream. Not the kind of scream anyone made if they were just messing about. It made me feel numb with a mix of cold and fear. I followed the sound up ahead, behind the skeletal-looking trees, and saw a girl lying in the snow in just a crop top and leggings. Both her feet were bare, and blood was trickling down the side of her face. In her hands were lime green snowflakes, about 8 of them, but from their angle, they looked like they'd been placed there. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a coat to put over her, and I didn't know what was wrong with her. I crouched over her and saw the matted blood in her hair. From what I could tell, she'd been hit on the side of the head with something. As I tried lifting her up, there was another piercing scream in the distance, and a few seconds later, I saw a dark figure running past the trees. I instantly knew they weren't part of the contest. They ran out in front of me, and I don't know how much I can say, but it was a man in his 30s. He looked like he didn't want to be there, but there was this urgency to his eyes. He held out his hands to give me something, and looking at me with those urgent green eyes, he said, "Here, take it, but when the time comes, you have to pass it on." I didn't want anything from him, but I saw the flash of neon blue in his hand, and with my hunger to win the Frost, I took it. He peered back at me with what looked like relief and guilt, and then darted off among the trees. Along with enough snowflakes to win, he'd handed me a blood-stained rock. I quickly took off 7 items of clothing and ran around throwing them about so they didn't look like they were in one spot. As for the bloody rock, I took off my boot and hid it in that. Then I somehow managed to get the girl conscious enough to help her back toward the clearing. I was the first one to return back to the clearing with 10 snowflakes and was declared the winner of the Frost that year. I went home with the $400 and carried on with my life. The girl and 2 others ended up in the hospital. They later claimed someone had crept up on them and knocked them out. Despite this, the Frost continued each year. As the years passed by, I tried not to think about that green-eyed man, but every year on the day of the Frost, horrible things always seemed to happen to me. Disturbing things. Things that this year led me back to that town and to my old home. I searched through my stuff and found the old bloody rock and saw the engravings on it that I'd tried to ignore for the last decade. Carved on it was my name and the year, 2013. I don't like it, but I know what I have to do. I know how to make it stop. It's coming. The frost is coming, and I have to make sure I'm there to pass it on.